Thank you. Wow, what a beginning. Thank you. So we've realized that artists don't abide by the boundaries that we've created. They want to spill out over. And it strikes me that if creativity is a gift of God, God is sort of interested in crossing those boundaries and getting rid of them even. We're so good at creating boundaries. In fact, partly what our theological convictions do is to create boundaries rather than to eliminate them. But still, boundaries exist, and they're still important, even if they need to be crossed. Here's a question that somebody asked that relates to those kinds of boundaries, and that is, in some cases, in an unreached area where there are literally only a handful of Christians in a Muslim area, do we invite Muslims to create music for us? And if so, are there problems with that? Or is that something we should encourage? What do you think?
Of course, we should invite the co-creation of music and art in any way, because I think music transcends religion and boundaries. Yeah, so I would do that, particularly because when we do that, then we are listening to the other person, and that's so very important in establishing relationships and appreciating and respecting the other. Yeah, yeah. So I would say that yes, as far as possible.
I think not only we should, we must.
Yeah, absolutely.
Christianity is the only paradigm that truly has the breadth and depth of hospitality. Jesus says to love your enemies, prepare the table in front of our enemies in Psalm 23. That's an astonishing statement. You know, we remember the comfort of a good shepherd taking care of us, but he takes care of us so that we do not have anything to lose by making ourselves vulnerable to the enemy. And so, I mean, culturally speaking, also as our colleagues here at Brehm Center have done studies on how the Holy Spirit works in wider cultures, and we are realizing that the Holy Spirit may be at work in the marginal places where the churches cannot, will not go, in the cinemas, in places of what typically would be considered something to avoid. And yet the Spirit has continued to work through people who are broken and are looking for answers, but they're being authentic and honest. So maybe that's the case of our hosting, but we being hosted by them. I tend to believe that if we are at least open to that journey, we will see more of the Spirit's work in culture, in sometimes very hard and contested areas.
Well, let me just add that I think there is the issue of power and power inequality. If you're working in areas where the Islam is a majority religion, obviously the power is there, and you are minority. But I think, was it James who said, we really have to operate out of a different paradigm, in the paradigm of love and something that's really open, despite the fact that the power dynamics are at play. So it's something to consider.
Yeah, I was struck by the fact that in the clips that there was dancing, there's music, and there's the visual elements. Somebody was asked, is a little bit troubled that was focus on music and dance. There wasn't much on the visual arts, but maybe the visual arts is conceived slightly differently in that context. And Mako's example was clearly something that has to do with the artisanal, which is a visual. Make comments on that. Do we want to avoid importing our sort of Western dichotomies into these regions? And to what extent is the visual an important element in what you were talking about?
I think that if we are talking about visual as in art and static art, it's just, then that particularly in Asia, we feel that that's the domain of a more higher upper echelons of society.
Elite culture.
Yeah, elite culture. Yes. Well, of course, we have street painters and all that. But I think the visuals are very important, particularly in Kita Serumpun, where the lighting set everything for the music and the dance. And I couldn't show it because it was a really long clip. But it was the lighting that was highly effective, and the images that were on the ground. The Olympic thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought they were visual as much as music. I mean, what we saw here today, that's a visual presentation as much as it was musical. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is especially true when we're talking about worship experiences of the community and of the people, and not the cultural commodities.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason why I took up the joget was because in churches, people tend to just do jumping up and down as a dance, or they pretty much look at YouTube and see how people in the West dance, and so they do that dance. But Malaysia is really rich in its cultural dances, and the joget is one of them, you see. So it was remarkable that he picked that up and he did that. So yeah.
I was struck by the fact that in the three places you mentioned, there seems to be a kind of openness to the foreign influences. We tend to think of that as a negative thing, but you were kind of reframing that. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
I think when I went back to Malaysia, that was about 6 or 7 years ago, I was always thinking that, you guys really got to be more cultural and do your own, local stuff. When I went back, I really realized that people there, the Western and global influence can never be taken out. It's become part and parcel of life and who they are as a society, their growth as a community. And I had to learn to step back and hear what they are saying. So this was a result of my stepping back and say, tell me where you all are at. Yeah, so that's... So, and I realized, hey, it's not a bad thing, Yeah.
Well, if you do study of new cultures being birthed, it's always in zones of mixed zones of influence. I call it cultural estuary, where salt water and fresh water come together to create the most beautiful, diverse ecosystem. And actually the most delicate, but it is critical. So when you look at 17th century Japan, where the Jesuits and Franciscans are coming into Japan and having that influence, or 20th century New York City, early century, where all these immigrants from Europe ended up in New York, creating a dynamic cultural mix that led to creation of abstract expressionism and so many other examples. So it's actually important to have interdependent elements coexisting within a realm that have a particular care for the diverse and often contentious reality. You need to have a bigger vision for what the new mix, new culture will be about, and tolerance, I guess, to allow these elements to coexist and to be together at the same time. They're creating overlaps. So it seems to me that there's a value. And I think this interdependence flows right out of the gospel, that the biblical foundation is the only place where it recognized the fissure and limitation of Babel and the potential of Pentecost at the same time. And it, you have to kind of frame this carefully, because if you go over in the direction of unity, this kind of uniformity, you lose everything. If you go too far in the direction of separate, distinct identities, or just insisting on the boundaries, not creating porousness between cultures, you lose something. You can't create new from either places.
Oh, thank you. A question that's going to be hovering over our lectures these whole 3 days is, in the Western worship tradition now, we're kind of experiencing a kind of global, what some people might call a consumer culture and so forth. Would either of you have some advice to how do we negotiate that in terms of trying to produce something that reflects local traditions and at the same time is aware of these global flows?
So, as a professional artist or artist trying to navigate that market forces, what I advise young artists is to always remember that their gift is not a commodity; it is a gift. We have to put it back into the gift economy, as it were, to always remember that even though we have to put it in the capitalistic, realities of the world, but your gift is to be held sacred. Just like Emily's dashes, I just sense that there's these violent forces that wrestle that away from us, will take away the best of our humanity and our souls. So how do you navigate that? It's the same question that I'm sure the young Cambodian artists, even Christian artists, are wrestling with. And the church has not done well to address this, right? So you assume that all these movement of praise music and in the world is there as a form of worship and as a way to point us to God. But we also don't realize how much it is its own capitalistic system. And it is ignoring, not by intent, but the very mechanism of it is Darwinian. So, a church is a place, right, where this gift economy operates in the world. So you're not against the capitalistic system, but you have to kind of make a stand vision-wise to say that, no, you are a gifted musician, you're a gifted artist, and we want to honor you to remain that way and not use this instrumentalism of, how we kind of turn everything as efficient industrial instrumental use. So, I always say please don't use art for evangelism. Because that does more damage to the soul of the person that you're using. I don't want to be used. Do you want to be used? And I said, you can't use the arts. It has its own dominion and it has its own place.
Yeah, we need to hear that. Sooi Ling, you must have thought about this a lot in terms of the global and the local. You have the last word? Give us some advice. We need some help here.
One of the problems that I had was when I went back was that I was talking all the time about this new vision or envisioning this, but there was no sound, and there was no art, in that sense, And so I think that we need musicians, poets, painters to come and envision this, and we need to, I don't think that the consumer culture is going to be there. It's not going to go away. It's like a train going down this track that one day it's just going to wrap, but you can't stop it. But what we can do is we can create alternative communities, you see. And so that's really what I'm after. I'm looking for alternatives. I'm looking for people who are willing to think differently. So it was so enriching to talk to this person who wrote the song United, because suddenly something just lit up. And I've known him for a while. He doesn't have this paradigm, And he was talking to me. He says, we really need to do this, And so I think being artists, we have to step out first, but to create sounds that people are able to access, so that's very important for me. Yeah, accessible sounds. Yeah. So, yeah.
And all the time remembering the dash is
Yeah.
the point of renewal, the new point there, the dash between the local and the global. That was
I think I was so amazed that you caught the dash, because the dash was really the most important thing for me, and I spent nights thinking about it. So, and I thought nobody's going to catch this, and I had to explain it every time people ask me, and I'm so happy that I don't have to explain it. And he catches it, So thank you so much.
We'll never look at our editing the same again anymore. Thank you very much. Let's give them a hand and appreciation for what we've done.